Hey guys, welcome into the Eye on College Basketball YouTube channel. My name is David Cobb, and I am a college basketball writer for CBS Sports. And I am joined today by the Director of Scouting for 24/7 Sports and a college basketball insider for CBS Sports HQ, Adam Finklestein. Adam, how are you today, sir?
Doing great, thanks. How about you?
I'm doing well. I think for both of us, and probably more so for college basketball coaches around the country, there's a little bit of a burden off the shoulders as on May 1st, the deadline passed for players to provide their current schools with a written notice of their intention to enter the portal. And so guys can still enter the portal, but unless they hit that May 1st deadline, they're not going to be eligible immediately for next season, which in essence means that for the first time in several months, from a roster management standpoint, coaches have kind of been able to exhale a little bit and not have to worry or look over their shoulder and wonder if somebody on their roster is going to get poached, or if at the 11th hour they're going to lose 2 or 3 of their 13 scholarship roster spots to guys transferring. And so I know for college basketball coaches, this has been a stressful adjustment to a new era within the sport. Football coaches are dealing with it as well, but it's particularly pronounced on the basketball side of things, because it used to be that your season ended in early March, and then you by that time were pretty clear what your roster was going to look like in the upcoming season. Now that's not necessarily the case. And so the amount of roster overhaul in the sport is really high compared to what it was prior to the portal era, and the ability of players to transfer one time and receive immediate eligibility. We're at around 1,600 players transferring this year, and it's been crazy. So, Adam, kind of what are your general thoughts as, before we get into some specifics about certain guys and certain programs and certain players, what are your thoughts kind of about the way the landscape has changed and where we are right now in early May?
Well, I think the pendulum is swinging a little bit. We for years, I don't think that the student athletes had anywhere near enough rights. And now we're starting to see them being able to monetize their name, image, and likeness, be able to transfer immediately. And so things have drastically changed in college basketball, and certainly as it relates to roster construction. I don't think the change is done, though. I think this is especially with regard to the portal, I think this is a minefield right now that has not been figured out yet. And I think, 2 or 3 years down the road, we're probably going to look back at this period of time and say, geez, that was crazy. If only because even if things haven't really shifted, then at least the market will have adjusted and people will kind of know what the expectations are. That's the thing to me that's so noteworthy right now, is whether it's players or people guiding players through the process, or even coaches, they don't know the rules. They don't know the rules as it relates to NIL. They don't know what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And it varies, quite frankly, state to state, according to state law, and even school to school. So it's really just totally unpredictable right now. And but somebody made a great point. It's one of the things, the unintended consequences, it has created an action-packed offseason, to be sure.
Absolutely, it has. Thinking back in December, a lot of times at that first signing date, a coach used to be able to get a picture of what their roster would look like for the following season, because you could look at your seniors. Okay, those guys are leaving, and now we're signing here in December some players who are going to be with us after they graduate from high school next year. Now, that certainty is just not there anymore. You have to wait another 6 months. So maybe some coaches are finally now getting some time on the beach or some time on the golf course that they might have had in April.
I don't know about that.
Well, the AAU circuit is heating up too. I want to ask you about this before we get into some specific teams and players from the portal perspective. You in your role as director of scouting, work a lot on the high school prospect side of the sport. How has the proliferation of transferring altered the landscape for high school prospects who perhaps in the past may have had more opportunities than they do now?
Yeah, dramatically in multiple ways. And I think The first one, let's just start with the obvious, budget constraints. If you're talking about a BCS program, a blue blood program, that's not as much of a factor. But for low to mid-major schools, they just don't have the same amount of money to allocate in their recruiting budget every year, because they're hosting so many visits in the spring. And that's what the point ties into your previous point about, things starting to lighten up for college coaches right now. Just because players are in the portal now, we basically know, who's available. We don't yet know where they're going. And so right now it's about coaches trying to fill out their roster. They're still hosting official visits. And if you think about the time of year, a lot of college campuses are starting to end the academic school year. And if you're a college coach, you want to bring kids in on visits when there's still students on campus. That's when it's going to show the best, ideally when it's the warmest outside. I mean, those don't sound like big factors, but when it comes to making a presentation to a prospective student athlete, assuming it's not just about NIL, those are all very, very relevant. So you add in the amount of official visits and even unofficial visits that are going on in the spring right now. That's totally unprecedented because of the transfer portal and the impact that's had on high school players and their recruitment. So there's the budget concerns, as I mentioned, and then it's just about having to prioritize where you need to be on a weekend. So the April, what we call the April live period, and that's not an official NCAA term. That's just the way it's referred to in the grassroots world, which basically means there's 2 weekends in the month of April when college coaches are allowed to go to non-scholastic, which means AAU basically, or AAU style, I should say, events and see grassroots teams play. And there was less foot traffic at those events. And I'm talking about the sneaker circuits. Nike, Adidas, Under Armour all have their own sneaker circuit. There was less foot traffic at those events than I've ever seen before. And a lot of that has to do with college coaches not being able to prioritize high school players right now, especially not for the 2023 class, because they're still trying to finish up their 2022 class, or even before that, working on retention of their 2021-22 roster. So the 2023 high school class is, a long way from being a priority for most of these college coaches. And as it relates to the 2022 high school class, I think what it's done, it's really altered the supply-demand ratio for college coaches. And I think that although it has tweaked the market a little bit, I think at the end of the day, most players are still ending up at the level they probably would have before this, but it's taking longer because they're becoming a secondary priority. The transfer market has to settle first before a lot of these coaches are going back into the high school ranks. And by that time, the pressure on these kids and these families is immense because it's so late in their senior or post-grad year of high school that it just creates a lot of, anxiety for these kids about what their destination is going to be next year. So I think really that's probably the most tangible impact on the high school kids is the delay it has had and when these decisions have taken place historically.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I want to make a clarification here. May 1 marked the deadline to enter the transfer portal. There is no NCAA mandated deadline for when you must commit to your new school. So just because the deadline has passed to enter the portal doesn't mean that everyone in the portal has declared where they're going to go. That some of these decisions could drag on for weeks and potentially devolve into recruitments that last up until the eve of the fall semester in some cases. That's within the realm of possibility.
And the other thing, David, we've got 247 college underclassmen who declared for the NBA draft. So that's just another added layer of unpredictability in terms of roster management. There's only 58 picks in this year's draft. So you've got, almost 4 times plus going through that process right now and trying to get an invite to the combine in Chicago. And we still have to see which of those players are going to come back. So although we know who is in the portal, to your point, the dust has not settled in terms of these coaches knowing what their rosters are going to look like yet.
Yeah, some of these guys sort of have a triangle of leverage here, and bear with me on this, but you've got Teddy Allen and Matthew Meyer who come to mind as guys who got in the portal at the last minute who are also going through the NBA pre-draft process. So they've got the pro opportunity over here. They've got their prior institution over here, and then they've got this third element too, which is a potential destination in the portal. And if the representation is any good, they can sort of pull on the different levers of that triangle to leverage the best opportunity, be that NIL or a two-way contract at the next level, something overseas. Maybe Matthew Meyer can get drafted, right? So that's an interesting element of this as well, is that historically, when you think of leverage, perhaps in the college baseball sense, right, you're going to leverage you draft stock for more money, or else you're going to go back to school. We're kind of starting to see that element appear now in college basketball, and it's got multiple layers to it. When you consider the portal, I'm sure Meyer would likely be open to a potential return to Baylor under the right circumstances. And then you've also got yeah, Adam, I'm glad you brought up Nigel Pack, because he is certainly in the conversation for this next question, which is, who is the biggest transfer portal move this year? And that can be whatever criteria you want to apply to it, be it impact a player is likely to have on the major college level next season, or just best overall player, regardless of destination. So Pack is in that conversation, certainly in my opinion, but who do you view as the biggest overall mover on this year's portal market?
Yeah, I think you've got to start with Pack just because of his implications on the market itself. One, he's one of the best players on the market. He's going to a school that just made an Elite Eight run. He's going to step in and play an immediate role there. But then there's, there was the publicity of his announcement, the expectations, or maybe even the false expectations it set on the market, the implications it had on Isaiah Wong, his public statement about how he was going to leave unless he got more money. And so I think just the totality of that impact on the transfer portal and the perceptions around it, I think has to make him the biggest one. But given my roots in the high school and grassroots space, to me, Amani Bates is an equally big story, because this is a player who, as a 15-year-old, many of us, myself included, probably, prematurely labeled him a potential generational talent. I will, we're going to be talking more about this on 24/7 in the coming days, but I still maintain he's the best 15-year-old I ever saw. In the 3 years since, it hasn't evolved as we initially expected. But to act like he is not a dynamic talent would be naive. And despite the fact that okay, he's not a generational talent, but we're talking about a big time talent who, if he gets into a situation where he is going to allow himself to accept coaching, to play within parameters and really be forced to grow, I think there is an opportunity here for a revitalization of sorts, which would be, which I'm kind of rooting for, just given all of the eyeballs and that have been on this kid since he was so young and the microscope he's been under.
Yeah, both those guys, Bates and Pack, going to be super fascinating to watch and see what happens to them next. I like to kind of take this one a different direction when I'm ranking for CBS Sports the top transfers in college basketball. In my mind, I always kind of go through this exercise of who is most likely to have the biggest impact on the court in college basketball next season. And at the moment, I've got Kendrick Davis and Nigel Pack 1 and 2. But at the end of the day, do I really see Memphis or Kansas or Miami in a Final Four next year? And I'm not convinced of that. So it's, all right, who in this year's transfer market do I see most likely translating to an Oscar Tshiebwe or a Remy Martin, national player of the year type of candidate, potential impact player on a national champion type of squad. And I keep coming back to a couple of names of guys who are still uncommitted, who I think could potentially kind of fill that role. And it's Isaiah Mosley from Missouri State, big time scorer, super efficient. He's getting, love from the likes of Duke and Kansas and Texas Tech during his re-recruitment process. And then the other guy is Tyrese Hunter, who was the Big 12 freshman of the year at Iowa State, who similar types of schools that are involved in his re-recruitment. And both those guys are guards who can be your leading scorer. In the case of Hunter, a really good defender and distributor as well. So a couple of really big guys still out there on the market who I think could really change the way we view the sport next season.
And I've got to add one more name to that. I think Baylor Shireman going to Creighton, going home to Creighton, and the fit that he's going to have on McDermott's system there. I mean, you're talking about a guy that was ultra efficient, but still creative, a playmaker in a forward spot. And he fits, in my mind, what was the only hole in Creighton's returning lineup, a team that was already projected to be potentially a top 10 team in the country, lands one of the best transfers in the country, and it's a perfect fit in terms of the roster, in terms of the style of play. So I think he's got an opportunity. I don't know if it's going to be Oscar Tshiebwe-like, but I think he's got an opportunity to play a really important role on a team that could be one of the best in the country.
That's a good point, and I've got some Baylor Shireman hot takes for you coming up in just a little bit. I'm a little bit I don't want to say bothered, but I think we might need. I think we might need to pump the brakes on the Creighton national title talk.
I love it. I love to disagree. We got to do this more often. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, let me silence my cell phone here, and I'm going to get to my points that I got to make.
He's upset.
I'm going to make my points on Shireman in a second. There's another question I want to ask you first, though, and he might be your answer to this, but. I mean, who's the guy that in your mind is an underrated transfer signing right now? Maybe somebody who we're not talking about, who maybe isn't on my list or the other writers' lists of, these potential impact transfers.
So I want to give the A-10 a little love here. Zeb Jackson going from Michigan to VCU, former top 100 prospect. I think this is just a great example of someone who is more comfortable being a big fish in a small pond. And no, I'm not calling VCU a small pond. I'm just saying that you saw similarities even in high school in terms of when he was at a smaller school, he thrived. When he went to Montverde, he struggled to establish his own niche. And I think what you're going to see is something very comparable here at the college level. I expect him to really bounce back and remind everybody next year at VCU why he was a top 100 caliber recruit. Not somebody that a lot of people are talking about right now, but one of two players to go from Michigan to VCU and play for Mike Rhodes. The other one, just very quickly, Earl Timberlake, guy who was at once a top 40 prospect in the country, committing to Bryant. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, this is a guy who we all thought was probably going to be in the NBA at this point. And, he's had some injuries and played. This is going to be his third school in 3 years. But just the sheer talent in that league as they join the America East, I think is off the charts.
Yeah, but Adam, can he fill the Peter Kiss role?
Who can fill the Peter Kiss role? I mean, push-ups on the baseline. I don't know about that, but I tell you what, he can get downhill, get buckets, and make plays for other people.
Yeah, as a former Memphian, I used to write for the Commercial Appeal. I covered the Grizzlies for a year and a half there, and I'm from Memphis, and so it's fun to hear Amani Bates and Earl Timberlake come up, two players transferring out. I'm sure that the Memphis people will listen to this with a little bit of a grimace that neither of those worked out. But my answer to the underrated question is it's the Mitchell twins who are going to Arkansas from Rhode Island.
You're going underrated.
Oh yeah, because look,
this is great. We're gonna battle. Okay, this is okay. Good. Go. Yeah.
So when I look at who I'm going to put in a ranking, be it top 15, 20, now it's at 25, top 25 transfers, I try my best not to look at what anybody else has, anyone else has them ranked, because I don't want that to subconsciously influence, where I'm going to put these guys. And so I'm like, all right, you're talking about two.
All right, hold up. I know this is our first show together, but I mean, the last question here is overrated transfers. And I feel like we're both going to pick we're both going to clap back on each other. So with all due respect, you're the host. I'm going to let you go first. So you tell me why my Creighton guy is overrated, and then I'll tell you why your Arkansas guy is overrated.
All right. Okay. So you picked up on the fact that Baylor Shireman was going to be my overrated transfer portal signing. And look, I'm old enough to remember when 9 months ago, I fell into the trap of thinking Texas was going to the Final Four because they picked up Marcus Carr and Timmy Allen and Dylan Dessou and Christian Bishop. And you can kind of trick yourself once the offseason arrives into thinking that a single player or a couple of transfers are going to be the magic juju to turn a team that everyone wants to be good into that magical team in college basketball. And my deal with Shireman is that, I mean, based on the reaction over the last, 72 hours, you would think that he's the next LeBron James. And he's a great player, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, if we're talking about Creighton entering the national title conversation, that's a team that has to get so much better offensively. And I know, obviously, Shireman should help with that. But you're talking about a team that also lost Ryan Hawkins and Alex O'Connell. So even if Shireman is just as productive in the Big East as he was in the Summit League, and that's a big if, but even if he is, they're still going to have some production they need to replace, because between O'Connell and Hawkins, those two guys accounted for over half of their three-point makes. And that's a heavy burden to place on Shireman's shoulders. And look, he's a good player, and I know the Big East is wide open now with Jay Wright's retirement, but national title, or I just think we're getting carried away. And I think that's why I've got him on my list, but he's down at 21. I think he's a little bit overrated.
All right. That's fair. I'm not even going to push back on that. I'm going to let you have your rebuttal. I'm going to move on to Arkansas now. I've already offended the people in Memphis. I might as well just slide over to Arkansas. And I'll say this about the Mitchell twins. And again, I'm going back to my experience having watched them for 6 or 7 years right now, because these twins were celebrated prospects as high school underclassmen. So I watched them. I first saw them in their freshman year. I watched them their sophomore year, their junior year, their senior year. They go to Maryland. They go to Rhode Island. They're supposed to revitalize the Rhode Island program. And at some point, potential has to turn into production. And I get at Arkansas, they're not going to be offensive focal points. You got the trio of Burger Boys coming in. You've got a ton of perimeter firepower. If anything, they're going to have to adapt to going to get their own on the glass and doing it on the defensive end, because there's just not going to be enough balls to go around. But as I said, at some point, I just need to see potential turn into production, because it hasn't happened yet. And they are too talented to do that. And I also think, I know the twins like to play with each other a lot. They're both centers. And it's hard to put two centers on the floor together at the same time. So my apologies. I know this is going to offend the Arkansas fan base. I'm sure this wasn't in my best interest in terms of my social media followers. I'm a huge Must Bus fan. I agree with everything you said in terms of what he does with transfers and how reloading the roster. I just don't know that these two guys are going to be able to play on the floor together as impactfully as maybe you do.
When Mikal Mitchell blocks a shot in the final seconds of an Elite Eight game next year to send Arkansas onto the Final Four, I'm going to tweet out this video, and I'm going to tag you in it, and the Arkansas fans are going to be merciless. So just prepare yourself.
I'm duly noted, sir.
Well, Adam, thank you for joining us on this Ion College Basketball YouTube special, talking about the transfer portal. It's been fun. We're still not done, though. We've got several players yet to commit, and we'll be keeping track of all that action at CBSSports.com and 247sports.com as well. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you on the flip.